News of the Times. Murder in uniform. The death of William Glass and the hanging of Inspector Montgomery. Welcome to News of the Times. In the summer of 1871, a quiet Ulster town was engulfed in a scandal that stunned Ireland and echoed across the empire. A bank cashier was found brutally murdered, his skull shattered, a file driven into his ear, and the banknotes gone. But the real shock came when suspicion turned not toward a desperate stranger, but a respected officer of the law, Sub-Inspector Thomas Hartley Montgomery, a gentleman, a decorated policeman, and a man who knew the bank, its staff, and its routines. What followed was one of the most extraordinary criminal sagas of the Victorian age. 3 trials, nearly 100 witnesses, accusations of financial ruin, forged debts, and secret knowledge of police procedure, and buried in the woods outside town, the stolen money and the weapon. This episode examines the case in depth. The daylight murder that no one saw, the missing money that kept reappearing, and the inspector's strange movements and strange comments, and the Victorian obsession with character, respectability, and motive. And a legal battle so complex that the judge called it the most protracted case I have ever presided over. Now, was Montgomery an innocent man trapped by circumstance, or the ultimate inside killer hiding in plain sight? And in today's end of episode further particular story, we look at a Halloween prank, an unsuspecting Harold Lloyd, and one very confused Glasgow mother who found her 13-year-old son wearing stolen white flannel trousers. We've all known a boy like this. Some of us may have been him. So, settle in, won't you? A cup of tea, a biscuit, and perhaps something stronger. And let us step back into Ulster in 1871 with a quiet Thursday afternoon that ends in blood and bewilderment. Newtownstewart in 1871 was the kind of place most Victorians would have described as quiet, almost painfully so. Set in the rolling countryside of County Tyrone in the north of Ireland, it sat along the banks of the River Owenkill, a market town of perhaps 1,500 souls, surrounded by farmland, linen mills, and wooded estates owned by the local gentry. The railway had arrived not long before, bringing connection and modernity, but only just. The old world still held tight here. The pace was slower. Horses, not carriages, gossip, not newspapers, carried the news first. There was a castle on the hill, a legacy of older power, and beneath it, the tidy order of Victorian respectability. Linen bonnets, market days, the business of small lives carried on in the shadow of something larger. It was the sort of place where scandal was unthinkable, and murder, particularly murder involving a gentleman of the law, was all but unimaginable, which is perhaps why, when it happened, the shockwaves were felt not just in Newtownstewart, but in Dublin, London, and even across the Channel. Because if this could happen here, in a place so quiet, so proper, so known, then nowhere was safe from suspicion. From the Dublin Evening Mail, the 3rd of July, 1871, the appalling murder in Newtownstewart. On Thursday last, the manager of the Newtownstewart Bank, Mr. Stratham, had occasioned to be absent at Drumquin Fair transacting bank business, and the cashier, the young man who was so foully met his death, was left in charge. The policemen stationed at Newtownstewart were also, with the exception of two, absent at Drumquin Fair on duty, and these circumstances would appear to have been carefully noted by the assassin. It appears that, as usual, the bank was closed to the public at about 3 o'clock, and no unusual sound afterwards indicated to the people without of the foul deed that was being done within. Mr. Glass was alone in the bank after closing. Shortly after 4 o'clock, a female servant of the manager went down the hall to peep through a glass door communicating with the bank to ascertain the hour from the office clock. To her horror, she perceived a large quantity of blood scattered across the office floor. She at once gave the alarm, and when it was discovered that Mr. Glass had been foully murdered, fully a dozen wounds, any one of them sufficient to cause death, gashed the skull. The brain itself, in several places, frightfully protruded. The wounds appeared to have been inflicted with a small hatchet, cleaver, or some similar instrument, and, from the depth to which they penetrated the bone, the medical men were of the opinion that they must have been inflicted by a very powerful hand. The murderer, not contented with this mangling of his victim, had, in addition, procured a sharp-pointed file belonging to the bank, and this he had driven nearly 3 inches into the ear of the murdered man. This frightful barbarity would seem to indicate that the murderer knew that if he left his victim any chance of returning to consciousness, he knew and could identify his assassin. Upon further examination, it became evident that the first blow, which would appear to have been a large gash on the right side, rather towards the back of the head, had been struck not where the body was found lying, but in the inner office, which communicated with the outer, and most probably whilst Mr. Glass was stooping, depositing, as was his custom every afternoon, the cash box in the safe. This, a large spurt of blood on the wall near to the safe, seemed to testify. There were also heavy marks of blood to be traced all along from this spot to where the body was found, and on the posts of the door connecting the inner with the outer office, portions of hair and clotted blood of the deceased were found. The unrelenting murderer had evidently pursued him to the spot where death terminated his cruel sufferings. The murderer succeeded in carrying off a considerable quantity of notes, about £1,520 worth, but it would seem as if some sudden alarm had seized him, as gold and silver, which were also in the box, were left untouched. Approximate value of the missing money, it was about £195,000 in 2025. The inner safe, of which the manager had the key, was not disturbed. How the murderer managed to secrete himself in the inner office as he appears to have done, and how he effected his escape, remains a mystery. On examination, the office showed that the deceased had completely finished the work of the day, the letters containing the several cash remittances having been written by him, ready for the vouchers of the various transactions, carefully filed, and all lying undisturbed on his desk. Mr. Glass, so suddenly and fearfully bereft of life, was a strong, robust young man, aged about 24, and he leaves a widowed mother to mourn his loss. In a town like Newtownstewart, this was more than a murder, it was a rupture. A place where nearly every face was familiar, where gossip travelled faster than the post, and where the bank clerk, the constable, the minister, and the miller all nodded to one another in the street. Violence was not unknown, of course. Ireland in the 1870s had its troubles, but this sort of violence, this ferocity, this almost personal savagery was unprecedented. And so the shock wasn't just in the killing itself, but in the dawning fear that the killer might be one of their own. And with that fear still raw, the machinery of Victorian justice moved quickly. The inquest was called the very next afternoon. Waiting, no delay, the body was scarcely cold, and instead of a courtroom, a packed public hall on Main Street would have to suffice. The inquest. The inquest was opened on Friday shortly after 4 o'clock in the spacious loft premises in Main Street, the property of Mr. Samuel Hood. Fanny McBride was first witness examined. She deposed, "I am the only female servant in the employment of the bank. There is a young lad named Robert Cook, about 14 or 15 years of age, in the employment of Mr. Strachan, and he is the only male servant employed at the bank. An old lady named Thompson is residing as a visitor at present with Mr. Strachan. Yesterday, Mr. Strachan went to Drumquin. I heard the deceased, William Glass, speaking to Mr. Strachan in the morning. I think it was about 10 o'clock. I did not see business people going into the bank during the day. At about 4 o'clock, I went to see the hour by the clock in the bank office. I looked through the glass door and saw blood on the floor, but didn't see the body. I then went across the street and told James McDowell. When I returned with Mr. McDowell, he opened the door and I saw Mr. Glass lying on the floor with his face to the ground and a good deal of blood scattered about him on the floor. I did not see any person come into the house and go upstairs. I did not hear any noise in the office during the day." James McDowell deposed, "I live in Newtownstewart, opposite the Northern Bank. I saw the deceased go into the office of the bank yesterday morning. I saw Mr. Glass after Mr. Strachan went about at about 10:30 o'clock. He was then alive, standing at the door. I spoke to him. I saw his head on several occasions through the office windows. At about 4 o'clock, I was called upon by Fanny McBride, who said, 'There's something terrible the matter with Mr. Glass. Come over, quick.' I ran across, and when I opened the door, I saw Mr. Glass lying on the floor on his face, and there was a large quantity of blood on the floor. I saw no weapon about at this time, and I saw a file afterwards. After I saw the deceased lying, I immediately ran out again. Sub-Constable John McElwain accompanied me from the barracks. And when I came to the bank the second time, I saw marks of blood on the office door. The inner door was ajar. I saw the cash box lying on the floor of the inner office, and there was a quantity of gold in the cash box. Shortly after I went into the bank, Mr. Gordon came in and remained for some time. Mr. Gordon was the first to notice the office file pushed into the ear of the deceased. I saw a man named George McFarlane go into the office of the bank at about 2:30 o'clock. I also saw him come out again. He remained in only a short time, not more than 3 minutes. I saw no one leave the bank afterwards except Mr. Montgomery, the sub-inspector, and this was about 3:30 o'clock. Sub-Inspector Montgomery came out of the bank after business hours. He had what appeared to be a waterproof coat over his arm. He walked away and turned back down the back street in the direction of Omar. Mr. Montgomery came into the office about 5. While I was there, he told me that he had been walking and that his clothes had got wet. I understood him to say that he had been walking in the direction of the bloody bridge. Mr. Montgomery told me that what took him into the bank was to ask Miss Thompson what time Mr. Strahan would be home, and that he might go and fish during the evening. I also asked Mr. Montgomery if he saw Mr. Glass in the office, and he said no, he did not, that he just walked through the hall and the office door was closed. This would be the moment that changed everything. From a witness who lived just across the square, someone with an unobstructed view of the bank door at all afternoon, came the quiet, devastating detail. He was certain that the last person he saw entering the bank around the time of the murder was Sub-Inspector Thomas Hartley Montgomery, a respected officer, a man trusted to uphold the law, now placed inside the crime scene at precisely the wrong moment. It was enough to shift the entire tone of the inquest. The coroner, addressing Sub-Inspector Montgomery, said, "After the examination of this witness and considering the feeling that has got abroad, I think it would be satisfactory for me to have the dress you had on at the bank. I also consider that, in addition to producing your clothes, you should allow your premises to be examined." Sub-Inspector Montgomery: "This is the first time I've heard that such a feeling was abroad, and by all means let the premises be searched." And so, with suspicion newly stirred, but before any formal accusation, the authorities took the unusual step of searching the sub-inspector's own lodgings. Sub-Inspector Hughes, accompanied by Mr. Humphreys, J.P., and Constable Devane of Omar, left the inquest to examine Montgomery's clothing, papers, and effects. When they returned, the picture was, at least on the surface, reassuring. James McDowell was recalled and confirmed he had seen Montgomery's coat as he left the bank that afternoon, although he couldn't be sure about the trousers. Montgomery himself had said that they were wet. But crucially, the foreman of the jury, a Mr. Hunter, reported that he had examined the clothes particularly and had found nothing suspicious upon them. No blood, no tears, no sign of struggle. Mr. Humphreys, the magistrate, added that they had also gone through Montgomery's boxes and papers, everything he possessed, and found nothing of concern. No hidden notes, no unexplained implements, no incriminating stains. And to underscore the point, the foreman noted that Montgomery had been most anxious to show them everything, every document, every drawer, and every garment. For the moment, at least to outward appearances, Sub-Inspector Montgomery seemed a man with nothing to hide. The inquest was resumed the following day, and more small but telling details were recorded. Miss Mary Thompson, Mr. Strahan's aunt, staying in the house, testified that Sub-Inspector Montgomery had called at around 3 o'clock, entering the drawing room to ask where the bank manager might return. He did not sit and he did not linger. She told him Strahan was expected at 6, and Montgomery replied that he would come back then. Shortly afterwards, the servant burst in with the terrible news. Miss Thompson had heard nothing, no struggle, no voices. The house had seemed perfectly ordinary right up until it wasn't. Meanwhile, the servant Fanny McBride was recalled. She confirmed she had stepped out briefly to buy cockles, but insisted she never lost sight of the door and no one entered while she was gone. Samuel Adams added a similar impression of routine. He saw William Glass alive at about 20 minutes to 3, paying in a cash order. The only people present were the cashier, a young girl named Kenny, and a woman in the hallway. No raised voices, no alarm, nothing strange. Just the still, quiet normalcy of a country bank, moments before something brutal shattered it. From the Dublin Evening Mail, the 4th of July 1871, the Newtownstewart murder. Mr. J. G. Strahan, the manager, deposed that on the day of the murder he attended Drumquin, as was his custom every Thursday on the business of the bank, leaving Mr. Glass in sole charge of the office and cash. When he returned, he made an investigation regarding the money and accounts. There was no memorandum from Mr. Glass showing how much should have been in the box, but there was about £1,605, 8 shillings and 10pence of a deficiency, a value of approximately £250,000 in 2025. He stated, "I found Mr. Glass lying behind the door in a pool of blood. The doctor arrived about 6 o'clock, and it was scarcely 5:30 when Mr. Montgomery arrived. To my recollection, I never asked Mr. Montgomery out to fish, and he never asked me. I never knew him to be out fishing since he came here. He has been on intimate terms with me, his family visiting mine and mine his. He frequently visited me and Mr. Glass in the bank. He knew how the business of the bank was conducted, and that I had to go to Drumquin every Thursday. He could scarcely be aware of the hour of my return, for I was never much earlier home than 4, nor later than 5 o'clock. Mr. Montgomery was formerly in the employment of the Belfast Bank and would know a good deal about the management of an office in a county branch. Mr. Montgomery pointed out how easy it would be for anyone to go in by the door around the desk, murder the cashier and walk off with the money. He asked what was to hinder a person doing that. Our inspector stated the same thing when he was lying here about 2 months ago. This case seems to be shrouded in as great a mystery as ever. Although the local police, supplemented by large numbers drafted from the surrounding districts, have thoroughly searched almost every inch of the ground traversed by Mr. Montgomery when he left the bank, no trace has been discovered of the stolen property or of the weapon with which the murder was committed. A.W.C. Hurd, Esquire, County Inspector, Mr. French, Detective Officer, and several other officials made also a thorough search of Mr. McCleggan's house and the premises where Sub-Inspector Montgomery lodges, but without any result. Sub-Inspector Montgomery is still strictly guarded by the constabulary, although allowed to occupy his own apartments. To this day, he cashed an order in the bank to which the murder was committed and with which he paid the salaries of the constabulary under his charge. Mr. Montgomery has retained Mr. John Ray of Belfast to appear on his behalf at the adjourned inquest on Wednesday. But while the early evidence gave only fragments, blood on a floor, silence in a house, a missing sum of money, more witnesses soon stepped forward. Focus even more sharply onto one man, Sub-Inspector Montgomery, not just as a caller at the bank, not just as someone who might have been nearby, but as a figure repeatedly seen at the very door of the bank at the very moment the murder must have taken place. And with that, the inquest resumed, bringing fresh testimony and rising public alarm. From the Dublin Evening Mail, the 6th of July 1871, the Newtownstewart murder. At the adjourned inquest today, a countrywoman identified Sub-Inspector Montgomery as a person whom she saw come to the door of the bank and look up and down the street and go in again about the time the murder was committed. 2 other witnesses swore that shortly after 3 o'clock on the day of the murder they heard a loud noise in the bank office, and a few minutes afterwards they saw Mr. Montgomery leave the premises and go along what is known as the back street. The inquest is again adjourned. The excitement is increasing. Despite an intensive search and despite the personal involvement of multiple senior officers, no trace of the murder weapon or the missing money could be found. Country Inspector Hurd, Sub-Inspector French from Belfast, Sub-Inspector Purcell and Sub-Inspector Hogben all scoured the district. Extra police were brought in. The countryside was searched in every direction. Hedgerows, ditches, riverbanks, footpaths, anywhere a bundle of notes or a blooded tool might be hidden. But nothing. No cash, no file, no hatchet, and no new witnesses who could firmly say where Sub-Inspector Montgomery had been in those missing minutes, the minutes when William Glass was savagely killed. Public indication did not cool. It grew hotter. The inquest was now more than a hearing. It was becoming a spectacle. From the Dublin Evening Mail, the 8th of July, 1871, the Newtownstewart murder, the inquest. Today, at 12:15 o'clock, the inquest on the body of William Glass was resumed before Mr. W.O. Orr, coroner, and a jury. As on the previous day, Mr. Montgomery was present in the custody of the police. The jury having answered to their names, Thomas Stewart, aged between 9 and 10 years, was called. The witness deposed to the coroner, "I recollect Thursday week. I knew Mr. Glass. On the day in question, I was standing at the Northern Bank in Main Street. The scholars were getting out of the model school. They go out at about 3 o'clock. A little boy named James Entricant was standing along with me. We went there together. I came from the Backburn, but he did not. While I was with Entricant at the bank, we were standing up at the 2 windows. Those are the windows in the front street, near the hall door. While we were there, I heard moaning in the bank. I asked Entricant, did he hear anything in the bank? For that I heard moaning. He said he did, and it was like a cow groaning that was being killed. I heard like a table falling. I also heard it being drawn over the floor. I heard no other noise at all." Multiple witnesses now came forward, ordinary townsfolk who had no reason to lie and every reason to remember where they saw a policeman on the day a man was butchered in the bank. Rose Carroll, the wife of a constable, saw Sub-Inspector Montgomery on Back Street at around 3 o'clock, the very time Glass was believed to have been killed. She saw him again 10 minutes later, returning the same way. Sarah Woods saw him shortly afterwards standing on Peter's Bank, looking toward the river, and then walking away, and then returning again less than 2 minutes later. Edward Armstrong, working by the roadside, saw Montgomery pass with a coat draped over his arm and what looked like a switch in the other hand. He noted the bare forearm. It was around 3:30. And further out still, a farmer named Alexander Moore saw Montgomery near Grange Wood, walking one direction on the country road and then later returning along the railway line. It began to rain. He stopped, put the coat on and walked on. None of these witnesses heard a shout for help. None saw him running for assistance, and there was no alarm, no urgency, no "the bank has been attacked," just the calm movement of a man walking the countryside while a bank cashier lay dead inside, his skull hacked open. At the continued inquest, the head constable took the stand, not to accuse Montgomery, but almost accidentally to narrow the field further. He confirmed that Montgomery had no role in sending the Newtownstewart police to Drumquin that day. The duty roster alone decided it. If the murderer struck while the town was unguarded, it was by chance or by someone who already knew the pattern. Then came a detail that sent a ripple through the room. When the head constable first entered the bank after the murder, he found lying beside the body 2 scraps of torn paper. One was wrapped from the Hue and Cry, the Police Gazette, not the copy sent to Sub-Inspector Montgomery personally, but the one sent to the police station. A clue torn from police paperwork dropped beside the murdered man. There was more. Before he could reach the body, other police had already been inside, trampling the scene. Evidence was already slipping. And when asked who could have committed such a crime, the head constable did not hesitate. No stranger, someone who knew the bank, the absence of the police, and the ins and outs of the place. Someone inside the world of law and order. From the Dublin Evening Mail, the 14th of July, 1871. The Newtownstewart murder. At the adjourned inquest today, a letter was read from Dr. Hodges stating that he had examined the clothing worn by Sub-Inspector Montgomery but had found no traces of blood on them. The inquiry was adjourned until Friday. The excitement was so great that it was found necessary this evening to remove Mr. Montgomery from his lodgings and place him in the police barrack. No new facts were elicited during the examination. Kirk, a surface man on the Irish North Western Railway, deposed to seeing Mr. Montgomery on the evening in question on the railway lines at 5 o'clock with a glazed overcoat. From the Dublin Evening Mail, the 17th of July 1871, the Newtownstewart murder. The inquest was continued today. Today, the sub-inspector's house was again searched, but as far as can be discovered, no trace of the money was found. The excitement continues very great. Mr. Montgomery was removed from Newtownstewart to Omagh Jail this morning under a strong escort of police. He was dressed as a policeman and was groaned by the spectators before bonfires were lighted at all corners and the utmost enthusiasm prevailed. Mr. John Ray, Mr. Montgomery's solicitor, was also loudly groaned on going to and from his hotel, also escorted. Discovery of the money. On Saturday, the money stolen from the Newtownstewart branch of the Northern Bank by the murderer of Mr. Glass, the cashier, was found in the Quarry Wood, about a mile from Newtownstewart, by a man named Manley, who, with his sons, had for some days been searching for it. They thereby gained the reward of £300 offered for the recovery of the notes. Manley, the discoverer of the money, was cheered into the streets and cheered by the crowd. Up to 4 o'clock, the excitement prevailed. The sum of £1,150 of the money was taken out of the safe at the time of the murder of Mr. Glass, and it was discovered by a young man under a stone in the wood, in which direction Mr. Montgomery was seen going after the crime. The money was given to the stipendiary magistrate. At the location spotted by the enterprising young man, County Inspector heard himself pulling out the bundle by hand, and he held in it £1,037 in notes. A second bundle nearby contained another £351. In modern terms, nearly £200,000. hidden in the undergrowth. Some of the notes bore bloodstains. One note and a bank post bill were identifiable to the bank's accounts. And then came the detail that electrified the town. The hiding place stood directly along the route Montgomery was repeatedly seen travelling on that fateful day, first on foot, then on the railway, even the next morning at dawn. 3 separate witnesses had placed him within yards of the very spot where the stolen money and the blood had been concealed. It now seemed clear that whoever killed Mr. Glass knew the bank, knew when it would be undefended, and knew this land well enough to hide nearly £1,400 where no stranger would think to look. The noose, at least in the public imagination, was tightening. From the Dublin Evening Mail, the 18th of July, 1871, the Newtownstewart murder. Exactly at the place where the witness Moore saw Montgomery put on his waterproof during the rain, a quantity of paper like grocer's blue sugar paper with large clots of blood on it had been discovered. These clots are such as would be produced by covering or wiping some instrument saturated with blood. The police continued their search for the remainder of the money and have also commenced to search the river for the hatchet or whatever instrument the murder may have been committed with, using 2 powerful magnets for the purpose, and as yet, however, they have been unsuccessful. The excitement in connection with this dreadful murder has in no way abated, but, on the contrary, it has increased since the finding of the missing money. The inquest will also be resumed today. Even with the money found, the most important piece of evidence remained missing: the murder weapon. Police redoubled their efforts. Labourers were hired to dig through every inch of ground Montgomery was known to have walked. Spades and crowbars were put to work. The river was searched not just by men wading, but by boat, dragging a magnet along the bottom, hoping to catch a hatchet or a file. Their attention centred on Peter's Bank, a high, sheer drop beside the river, the very place where the witness swore they saw Sub-Inspector Montgomery standing alone at the time of the murder. It was an ideal place to throw a weapon into deep water, but nothing was found. And just when it seemed the investigation had reached an impasse, the inquest took a darker turn. It emerged that this was not the first time Sub-Inspector Montgomery had been linked to strange events surrounding William Glass, nor the first time Glass's life may have been in danger. From the Dublin Evening Mail, the 10th of August 1871, the Newtownstewart murder. The inquest was resumed today. Mr. Strahan, manager of the bank, deposed that the total amount of money still missing was £174 and 10 shillings. He stated that on the May the 11th, Mr. Montgomery brought him the key of Mr. Glass's desk, saying that Glass was lying at his, Montgomery's, lodgings, sick. Glass afterwards told witness that gave him half a glass of brandy, which made him sick. From the Dublin Evening Mail, the 18th of August 1871, the Newtownstewart murder. Mr. Ray, having concluded his address on behalf of Sub-Inspector Montgomery, the coroner then charged the jury. He reviewed the evidence given, particularly that portion referring to Mr. Montgomery's movements on the day of the murder and the morning afterwards. He referred to the fact that Mr. Montgomery, having told the police to go to bed on the night of the murder, and that he also would retire, but the evidence showed that he had not gone to bed during the entire night, and he was seen on the Omar Road, where the money was found twice at an early hour the next morning. If the jury considered there were sufficient facts and circumstances disclosed to warrant them in finding a verdict of murder against Mr. Montgomery, they should do so. They were bound on their oaths to find when and where and by what means Mr. Glass met his death. The coroner, professional gentlemen, and the public then retired, and the jury were locked up to consider their verdict. The jury, after half an hour's consultation, returned the following verdict. We find that on June 1871, William Glass was found brutally murdered in the office of the Northern Bank at Newtownstewart, and we have come to the unanimous issue that Thomas Hartley Montgomery, Sub-Inspector of Police, is guilty of the murder. The coroner, on announcing the verdict of the jury, advised the public to show no exhibition of feeling, and this advice was acted on. At 7 o'clock, Mr. Montgomery was removed by car to Omar. He was securely handcuffed. Next to him sat County Inspector Hurd, and on the other side of the car, Mr. McClellan, governor of the jail, and an armed policeman. A large crowd assembled, who groaned and hooted and used opprobrious expressions. The crowd followed the car for a considerable distance. The case did not fade. If anything, public fascination only sharpened in the months that followed. The newspapers breathlessly reported every development: Montgomery's prison routines, his bottle of porter a day, his sudden gloom, and his confident talk of acquittal. The authorities scoured the countryside, continuing to drag the river at Peter's Bank with magnets, and then, astonishingly, more evidence began turning up. First, another £100 in bloodstained notes found 6 months after the murder, still bearing William Glass's handwriting. The weapon itself, a lead-weighted hedge knife, unearthed from a muddy ditch not far from the money's hiding place. By January 1872, detectives were hunting down shopkeepers from Belfast to America, trying to prove Montgomery had purchased the very tool that killed the bank cashier. The public, already convinced of his guilt, waited now for the only thing: the trial. And when the trial finally opened in July 1872, even getting started was a battle. Montgomery's counsel tried to delay proceedings, claiming the entire country was already convinced of his guilt. The judge refused the request, and so the case of the Crown versus Sub-Inspector Montgomery began. When the first trial opened in July of 1872, the Crown presented a case that was, on the surface, devastatingly simple. Only one man could have killed William Glass. There was no need for elaborate theories, no complex web of conspirators, no stranger slipping in unnoticed. The Crown walked the jury through the murder step by step. Glass was alive in the bank shortly before 3 o'clock. He closed the bank himself, alone, as he always did. The police were away at the fair. His manager was out of town, and the last person seen inside the bank with him, the last person known to enter before the door was locked, was Sub-Inspector Montgomery. Moments later, witnesses heard what could be interpreted as the sounds of the killing. Noises sounded like someone dying, the scraping sound of a desk across a floor, groans. No one saw another enter. No one saw anyone flee, except one man, Montgomery, calmly stepping out of the locked bank, a coat folded over his arm, walking away down the side street. The prosecution's case in the first trial was direct, relentless, and entirely circumstantial. No one had seen Montgomery strike the fatal blows, but the defence reminded the jury no weapon had been found, no blood was on Montgomery's clothes, and no one had seen the fatal blows. Was that enough to hang a man? After hours of deadlock, the jury could not agree. The judge told them plainly either Montgomery murdered William Glass or some invisible stranger committed the perfect crime and vanished without a trace. From the Londonderry Standard, the 20th of July, 1872. Disagreement of the jury. At 10 minutes to 2 o'clock, the jury retired, and at 5 minutes past 5, they returned into court. His lordship was at once sent for, and on his arrival in court, the foreman, Mr. George Bullock, announced there was no prospect of the jury agreeing to a verdict. His lordship said that they would have to return to their room, upon which several jurors stated that it was useless for them to do so. His lordship said he could not help that. He had an endeavour to come to a finding. The jury then withdrew. The court at this time was densely crowded, and there was a great excitement. Mr. Montgomery appeared deeply interested. When the appointed hour arrived, the court was densely packed. 5 minutes afterwards, his lordship took his seat on the bench. On the return of the jury into court on the second occasion, the prisoner displayed the greatest possible concern in the result of their deliberations, and, for the first time during the trial, his face, which had hitherto uniformly been pale, flushed. The Crown asked had they agreed to a verdict. The foreman, no. 11 in favour of conviction. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned to court deadlocked. 11 jurors were in favour of finding Montgomery guilty, but one refused to agree. With no possibility of a unanimous verdict, the jury was discharged. The case would now be sent forward for a second trial. The second trial of Sub-Inspector Thomas Hartley Montgomery opened with the same central charge that only he could have killed William Glass, but this time the Crown came not just to accuse, they came to seal every crack the defence had previously slipped through. There was no reinvention of the narrative, just precision. The prosecutor's aim was simple: tighten the net. They reminded the jury that Montgomery knew the layout of the Northern Bank intimately. He was a friend of both the bank manager and Mr. Strahan, and of Glass himself. As a trusted police officer, he had been welcomed behind the counter many times. He knew how the inner door could appear locked when it wasn't, and how someone familiar with the place could slip back inside without forcing a thing. And now a new witness stepped forward to say that they had seen Montgomery inside the bank, looking out, not just walking through, but clearly present. But the greatest shift came with motive. At the first trial, Montgomery's finances had been politely kept off stage. Not so this time. The prosecution laid them bare. The jury now heard that Montgomery was drowning in debt. He was overdrawn at the Ulster Bank. He was borrowed from his own subordinates, not loans, but the quiet absorption of their savings, treated as if they were his own. Promises of repayment had been made for the very week the bank was robbed. The missing £1,600 no longer looked like a mystery. It looked like air to a drowning man. Then came the words that stopped the room. Montgomery had once asked how easy it would be to knock a cashier on the head and escape with the cash. Now, with mounting debts, stolen savings, contradictory movements, and a curious number of evolving explanations, the Crown no longer needed to build a complex theory. They simply let the facts align. The Crown, certain that they now had closed every loophole left open at the first trial, entered the courtroom expecting a straightforward conviction. Their case was tighter, the motive clearer, and the evidence seemed overwhelming. But the defence stood firm. They reminded the jury again and again that this was purely a circumstantial case, that a man's life could not be taken on suspicion alone, that a respected officer of the law should not be condemned unless there was no room for doubt. And once again, it worked. The jury could not agree. The case still refused to close. From the Londonderry Sentinel, the 20th March 1873. Disagreement of the jury. The jury then retired at 12:15, and at 10 minutes before 2:00, his lordship returned to court, and the jury having been called back, his lordship asked, "Have you the issue paper?" "We have not agreed, my lord." His lordship, I know you have not. The issue paper was brought from the jury room and handed to the judge. His lordship then said, "Gentlemen, I understand you want to ask some questions." Several jurors said, "Yes, lord." One juror advanced towards the judge and asked, "Could a man be convicted of murder if no man saw him do the deed?" His lordship said, "Certainly, certainly, certainly." The jury again retired. At 10 minutes past 4:00, the jury again came into court, and the lordship asked if they had agreed to their verdict. Mr. Hackett, the juror, said, "No, sir." His lordship said, "Can I be of any assistance to be in reading over any of the transcripts?" Mr. Hackett said, "I have doubt. If it is a matter that I can explain or assist you in any way, I shall be the most happy to do so." Mr. Hackett, "I think not." His lordship returned to court at 12:00, when the jury were called out and answered to their names. In reply to his lordship, they stated they had not agreed a verdict, and they were then requested to retire. His lordship requested Dr. Todd to examine the jurors who complained of being unwell. Mr. Todd, having examined the jurors referred to, stated that further confinement would have been injurious to the effect in the case of the man named Quinn. The jury were then discharged. Sergeant Armstrong said on behalf of the Crown he desired to have the case re-investigated, and owing to the advanced age of some of the witnesses and the precarious condition of two others, he wished for a new trial at as early date as possible, and would therefore suggest Thursday, the 7th of March inst. After some conversation, this suggestion was adopted by his lordship. The prisoner, in a clear, firm voice, stated, "My lord, in consequence of the expense of my friends, I have been put by 2 protracted trials. The funds are exhausted, and I shall be obliged to ask your lordship to assign counsel to defend me if the Crown put me again on trial." Mr. Collins, solicitor for the prisoner, stated that up till the present hour he had received nothing for his services, and he now withdrew from the case. It was to be regretted that the prisoner be deprived of the able assistance he received from Mr. Collins, but that could not be helped. His lordship consented to the adjournment of the assizes. The prisoner was apparently taken by surprise when Mr. Collins withdrew from the case. Judging from his appearance when the jury were discharged, it was evident he was pleased with the result of the present trial. It is understood 10 of the jurors were for a conviction. Trial 3. The final chapter. After 2 trials that ended in hung juries, Montgomery was brought before a 3rd jury. This time the Crown's case was stronger. Motive, his desperate debts. Method, the buried money and the hedge knife found in the woods, and a more detailed reconstruction of his movements all pointed unmistakably in the same direction. When the third and final trial ended, with no dissenting jurors this time, the verdict was definite. Thomas Hartley Montgomery, sub-inspector of constabulary, was found guilty of the murder of William Glass. The case left a deep scar on Newtownstewart. This was not a murder between strangers, nor a crime committed in the heat of passion. It was inside the bank, in broad daylight, and, most difficult of all, carried out by a man who embodied law, discipline and public trust. Thomas Hartley Montgomery was executed at Omar Jail on the 26th of August, 1873. In the wider history of law and justice, the Montgomery case stands almost alone. To this day, he remains the only serving police officer in Irish history to be convicted and executed for murder. It was a trial that forced Victorians to confront a painful truth, that rank, respectability and uniform offer no guarantee of character, and that sometimes the most dangerous man is not the one outside the system, but the one standing confidently within it. Further particulars. When researching crime across the ages, we often find ourselves reminded that some things never change. The anxieties, the uncertainties, and yes, the human capacity for trouble. But the same can just as easily be said for that old phrase, boys will be boys. And after spending days immersed in sworn testimony, legal debates, and the grim weight of a murder trial, we come across this small story from 1927 and immediately knew we had to include it. It's the kind of tale where you can instantly picture your own relations, or possibly even yourself, attempting something similar in your day. A cinema window, a Halloween prank, and one very well-dressed effigy of Harold Lloyd, who never saw it coming. From the Aberdeen Journal, 16th of November 1927. Boys attack Harold Lloyd. When on Halloween at Glasgow, mother found her 13-year-old son disporting himself in a pair of immaculate white flannel trousers, she wisely came to the conclusion that something must be wrong somewhere and promptly informed the police. What the police discovered was related in Glasgow Police Court today, when 4 boys appeared in connection with an attack on an effigy of Harold Lloyd, the film comedian. Seeking appropriate carnival clothes, the boys, it was stated, entered the display window at a local cinema which was showing the comedian's latest film. An effigy of him was stripped of its entire makeup, which consisted of a college blazer, white flannels and a straw hat. The boys managed to enter the window, removing the clothing, and make it off without being disturbed, although the window faces a busy street. The clothes were shared by the youngsters, and they were placed on probation for 3 months. If you've enjoyed this journey into the archives with us, do consider supporting our small independent channel. A like, a share, and a kind comment, or even just whispering Victorian crime into the void of the algorithm, all helps bring us to more like-minded true crime enthusiasts, such as your good self. And if you'd like even more episodes, ad-free, early, and occasional eyebrow raising, along with exclusive content, you'll find a whole collection waiting for you at our home on Patreon. Your support helps keep the lamps lit and the stories coming. The link is in the description. This has been News of the Times, and I am Robin Coles, reluctant expert in recalcitrant juries and doors that should never have been closed. Until our next misadventure in Victorian England, do stay safe, avoid rooms with groaning behind them, and perhaps keep your back to the wall just in case.